My fiancé smiled and said, "You're the kind of man women appreciate later, not the kind they brag about now." I quietly took off the ring and walked away forever. 11 months later, she froze while watching a business interview about my company air across every screen inside the airport. "You're the kind of man women appreciate later, not the kind they brag about now." She said it with a smile. A warm, casual smile, like she was complimenting me. Everyone at the table laughed. Her friends, her sister, even the guy across from me who I'd met twice. I didn't laugh. I picked up my glass and took a slow sip of water. Set it down. Said nothing. Lauren looked at me the way you look at someone who doesn't get the joke. "Oh, come on. It's a compliment." I nodded once, smiled just enough, and let the moment pass. But something in my chest had already shifted. Not anger, not embarrassment. Something quieter, something closer to clarity. At the time, I told myself it was just her sense of humor. Told myself she didn't mean it the way it landed. Told myself I was being too sensitive. I was wrong on all 3 counts. Because 11 months later, that same woman was standing in Terminal B of O'Hare International Airport. Bags at her feet, flight delayed, and on every screen around her, the gate monitors, the CNN feed, the lounge television, there was a business interview playing. My face, my voice, my company. The anchor was calling it one of the most surprising tech acquisitions of the year. She stood completely still. I wasn't there to see it, but I heard about it. And if I'm being honest, I didn't feel anything close to satisfaction. What I felt was something harder to name, like watching a chapter of your life close from a very great distance. I didn't realize it then, but that moment at the dinner table, her smile, their laughter, my silence, that was the beginning of everything. We'd been engaged for 4 months when she said that. The ring had been on her finger since February, a solitaire set in white gold. Nothing flashy, but she'd cried when I proposed. Real tears, the kind that fog your vision and make everything feel permanent. We had a venue shortlisted, a date in October. Her mother had already started talking about floral arrangements and whether we were doing a rehearsal dinner the night before. My mother had started quietly saving. We had a shared Pinterest board with 47 pins. I know because I added 3 of them. She added the rest. We had a life drawn in pencil, and I had spent 2 years filling in every line. Our apartment was a 2-bedroom in Lincoln Park. Her name was on the lease. Mine was on the utilities, the internet, and every streaming subscription we owned. I paid slightly more than my share. Not dramatically, just consistently. The way you do when you love someone and you want things to feel easy for them. I thought that was what partnership looked like. She thought it was the baseline. Something felt off, even then. A low-grade hum beneath the surface of things. The kind of thing you feel on a Tuesday afternoon when she doesn't text back for 6 hours and you tell yourself she's just busy. I ignored it. For longer than I should have. That would become a pattern. Not just with her. With myself. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. My name is Brandon. I was 31 when the engagement ended. Lauren and I had been together for 2 years and 8 months. I worked in software architecture for a mid-sized fintech company in Chicago's West Loop. Not a startup, not a corporation, somewhere in between. The kind of place that gave out performance bonuses that felt meaningful but not life-changing. I had a good salary, reasonable hours, a 401k I actually contributed to. I was, by any objective measure, doing fine. But fine is a complicated word when you're standing next to someone who measures success by loudness. Lauren worked in brand strategy. She was good at it. Sharp, creative, fast with people. She could read a room in 10 seconds and calibrate herself to it in 5. I admired that about her. For a long time, I thought it was one of the reasons she loved me. That I was the steady thing she could come home to after a day of performing. I think she eventually decided she didn't want a steady thing anymore. She wanted the performance around the clock. The first red flag didn't announce itself. It never does. It arrived quietly, the way most warnings do. We were at a rooftop party in River North. Her coworker Marcus had just gotten promoted to creative director. Big deal. Open bar. Rented space. Marcus was the kind of guy who walked into rooms like he expected applause. I'm not saying that to be small about him. I'm saying it because it's true. He wore his success like a costume. Loud sneakers. Louder opinions. Lauren lit up around him. Not in a way I could point to. Not in a way she couldn't explain away. But I noticed. The way she laughed differently. Leaned forward when he talked. Touched her hair twice in 4 minutes. I watched her from across the rooftop with a beer I wasn't really drinking. Later that night I mentioned it. Carefully. Without accusation. She looked at me like I'd suggested something absurd. He's just confident, she said. You could take notes. I let that land. Didn't argue. Just filed it somewhere. It became the first entry in a ledger I never wanted to keep. Her friend Courtney started making comments around the same time. Small ones. The kind you're not sure if you're supposed to hear. Lauren deserves someone who matches her energy. Some guys are just better on paper. She's so much fun at work events. Her boyfriend never comes to anything. I came to things. I just didn't perform at them. There's a difference. Courtney didn't seem to understand that. I'm not sure Lauren was explaining it to her. There was a Sunday in late April when I showed Lauren a property listing. A 3-bedroom townhome in Bucktown. Good bones. Reasonable price for the neighborhood. I'd run the numbers 3 ways. She looked at it for about 4 seconds. It's fine, she said. Then she went back to her phone. I asked if she wanted to schedule a showing. She said she'd think about it. She never thought about it. 2 weeks later, she mentioned offhand that her coworker James had just bought a place in Wicker Park. He moves fast, she said. Some guys just go for it. I stared at the property listing still open on my laptop. Said nothing. Filed it. Looking back, I should have paid attention. Not to her. To myself. To the way I kept translating disrespect into misunderstanding. To the way I kept offering patience where I should have been drawing lines. It was a dinner party. Her friend Heather, the one who had moved back to Chicago after a failed launch of some wellness brand in Austin, was hosting in her Wicker Park apartment. 8 people around a table. Good wine. Decent food. The kind of evening that sounds pleasant until you're inside it. Somewhere between the 2nd and 3rd bottle of wine, the conversation turned to ambition, careers, goals. Who was going where? Her friend Derek worked in private equity. He was the type who threw around deal sizes the way other people mention weekend plans. He just closed something. He wanted everyone to know. Lauren glowed at him from across the table. And then someone asked me what I was working on. I mentioned a new system architecture I was designing. Clean infrastructure. Significant efficiency gains. A project I was genuinely proud of. There was a polite pause. The kind of pause that's not really polite at all. Then Lauren smiled. That smile. The one I was learning to read. Brandon is really good at the behind-the-scenes stuff, she said. He's just not really she waved her hand. Front-of-house kind of person. Laughter. Not cruel laughter. But the easy, thoughtless laughter of people who aren't paying close enough attention. I put my fork down. Finished chewing. Picked up my wine. Said nothing. Heather changed the subject. Derek started talking about a ski trip to Aspen. Lauren leaned into the conversation like she'd been waiting for it. I sat next to her. Very still. Very quiet. Very awake. I replayed what she'd said 3 times before the dessert course. Not because it hurt. Because I was trying to understand what kind of person says that. Not in anger. Not as an attack. Just casually. Like your value was a minor detail at someone else's dinner table. I drove us home in silence. She was on her phone in the passenger seat. I merged onto the expressway. Kept my hands at 10 and 2. Thought about the ring on her finger. Thought about the October date. Thought about the 47 pins on a shared board. And for the first time, I let myself consider a question I'd been avoiding. What exactly was I building this life with? May turned into June. Her phone habits changed. Not dramatically. Subtly. Screen down on the kitchen counter when it used to be screen up. Stepping outside to take calls she used to take in the living room. A new password on her phone. I'd known the old one. She'd given it to me a year earlier without thinking about it. I noticed the change the way you notice a familiar smell disappearing from a room. You can't point to where it went. You just know it's gone. She started staying later at the office. 2 nights a week became 3. 3 became nearly every day. New vocabulary appeared in her conversation. Names I didn't recognize. Events I wasn't invited to. It's a work thing. You wouldn't know them. It's not really your crowd. I started paying attention to the texture of her explanations. They had gotten smoother. Too smooth. The way a practiced lie is smoother than an unrehearsed truth. Her friend group shifted. Courtney and Heather were still around. But there were new people. People I'd never met. People who apparently knew Lauren very well. I suggested we have a proper dinner. Get everyone together. Meet the new friends. She said we'd figure it out. We never figured it out. In mid-June, she came home from a Thursday networking event at midnight. Said it ran long. Said the conversations were great. I made her tea. We sat across from each other. She looked at her phone twice before she'd finished half the cup. I watched her. She didn't notice. That was the part that stayed with me. Not what she might be doing, but how comfortable she'd become doing it in front of me. Like I'd already been demoted in her mind. Already moved to the periphery. I kept hoping I was wrong. But the hope was getting harder to maintain. It was a Tuesday. She'd left her laptop open on the kitchen table. I wasn't looking. I want to be clear about that. I walked past to refill my coffee, and I saw it. Not a flirty message. Not a love letter. Something almost worse. An apartment listing. A one-bedroom in Fulton Market. And below it, a message thread. The name at the top was Marcus. Her coworker. The one with the loud sneakers and the louder opinions. The one she'd said I could take notes from. The message from him read, "It's close to mine. Just think about it." Her reply was 3 words. "I already am." I stood very still. Read it twice. Set my coffee mug down with more control than I expected from myself. Closed the laptop. And went back to my desk. I sat in front of my monitors for a long time. Didn't look at them. My whole architecture had been built on a false assumption. That she was unhappy with us. That we were the problem. But this wasn't about us. This was about a decision she'd already made. I just wasn't the last to know. I was simply the last to look. That was the moment everything shifted. Not toward anger. Toward something more final. Toward certainty. I waited 3 days. Not out of strategy. Out of a need to be completely calm before I said anything. I wanted to be fair. I wanted to look her in the eye and not feel like I was drowning. I wanted to be someone who handled it with his full height. We sat down on a Saturday morning. Coffee. Overcast light coming through the windows. I told her what I'd seen. I said it plainly. No accusations wrapped in questions. No performance of shock. Just the facts of what I read and what I understood them to mean. She went very still. Then she exhaled. And something I didn't expect happened. She didn't apologize. She tilted her chin up slightly and said, "You weren't supposed to see that." "I know," I said. "But I did." Silence. "So what do you want to do?" she asked. I looked at her for a long moment. At the ring. At the apartment around us. At the version of the future that I'd been maintaining alone for longer than I'd admitted. "I want to understand something first," I said. "Go ahead. Was any of it real?" The October date. The townhouse. The board with all those pins. She looked out the window. It was real when I thought it was enough. And then it stopped being enough. Not a question. She nodded once. Something cold settled in my chest. Not grief. Just truth. "Tell me what changed." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said it. "You're safe, Brandon." "Okay. I don't mean that in a good way. You're just safe. You're stable and you're predictable and you have this whole 5-year plan mapped out in your head, and I don't want to plan. I want to feel something. And around you I feel." She stopped. "Calm," I finished. "Yeah. I thought that's what people wanted. Some people do. I thought I did." Another silence. "He makes you feel something?" She didn't answer. That was the answer. "The dinner party," I said. The front of house comment. She had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable. I shouldn't have said that. "No," I said. "You shouldn't have. I'm sorry. You're apologizing for the comment, not the sentiment." She didn't disagree. I stood up. Slowly. Walked to the kitchen counter where my keys sat. Turned back to her. "I need you to hear something," I said. Not as an argument. Just as a fact. She looked at me. Safe isn't the same as boring. Steady isn't the same as small. And there are people in this world who will understand the difference. She opened her mouth. Closed it. I walked back to the table. Reached across it. And very quietly, with no ceremony at all, I took the ring off her finger. She didn't stop me. I set it on the table between us. Looked at it for half a second. Then picked up my coffee, carried it to the sink, rinsed the mug, and set it on the drying rack. I went to the bedroom. Packed a bag. Not everything. Just what I needed. She was still sitting at the table when I came back through. Still looking at the ring. I picked up my laptop bag by the door. "I'll arrange for the rest of my things." She nodded. "Brandon. Take care of yourself, Lauren." I walked out. Closed the door behind me with exactly as much force as it needed. Not a slam. Not a statement. Just a door closing. I walked to my car. Got in. Sat for about 30 seconds. Then started the engine. And drove away. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. Not because I was being dramatic. Because there was nothing behind me I needed to see. I walked away. And never looked back. The first month was the adjustment period. I moved into a furnished studio in the South Loop. 41st floor. A view of the lake on clear mornings. It was smaller than what I'd had. But it was entirely mine. I didn't talk about the breakup much. My friend Darius asked once. I gave him the short version. He nodded. Didn't push. That's one of the things I've always appreciated about him. He knows when a subject is closed. My brother called from Seattle when he heard. He asked if I was okay. I told him I was better than okay. He said that sounded like something people say when they're not sure yet. He was half right. I was sure. I just hadn't fully arrived at what I was sure about yet. The idea had been there for 2 years. A concept I'd been developing after hours. A platform architecture that I believed could solve a real problem in how enterprise software handled distributed communications. I'd sketched it in notebooks, built early frameworks on weekends, shown it to exactly one person, my coworker Raj, who'd said it was interesting but that I'd need serious capital to prove it. Raj was right, so I started working on that part. I put in 4 months of structured, obsessive groundwork. I woke up at 5:30 every morning, ran 4 miles, spent 3 hours on the concept before the workday started. I stopped drinking socially, stopped spending money on things that didn't move me forward. I rebuilt my body. I rebuilt my schedule. I rebuilt my thinking. No one saw any of it. That was deliberate. The thing I'd learned about building quietly is that quiet is a strategy. Noise attracts critics before you're ready for them. Silence protects the work until it's too strong to be easily dismissed. I reached out to a former colleague named Claire who'd moved into venture strategy. We had coffee in November. She asked me to send her the concept document. I sent it that night. She called me back in 4 days. "This is actually worth something," she said. "I know," I said. She paused. "I'm going to introduce you to someone." That someone was David Park, a seed investor in Chicago's West Loop who specialized in infrastructure technology. We met in December. I walked in with 3 years of thought in a 40-slide deck. He listened for the full 60 minutes, asked sharp questions. I answered every one. He looked at his notepad, then at me. "What are you calling it?" I told him. "Air." He wrote it down. I heard about Lauren the way you hear about things you're no longer involved in. Through Darius, mostly, who heard through people who still moved in those circles. The situation with Marcus had lasted about 4 months. It ended badly. Details Darius relayed with the careful neutrality of someone who knows they're walking a line. Apparently, Marcus had been seeing Lauren as one of several situations running simultaneously. She found out through someone at her own company, at a Thursday happy hour, the same kind of Thursday event she used to stay late for. There's an irony in that I didn't choose to feel anything about. She moved out of Lincoln Park, took a smaller place in Logan Square. I knew this because she'd mentioned mutual friends I still saw occasionally. The wellness brand she and Courtney had been in early conversations about never materialized. There was a money disagreement, a falling out. Courtney apparently told several people that Lauren had borrowed money and been vague about repaying it. I don't know if that's fully accurate, but the friendship was over. I didn't celebrate any of this. I want to be very precise about that. Whatever happened to her was happening to her. It had nothing to do with me. The version of me that had once needed her to see my value had been replaced by someone who simply didn't need that anymore. When Darius relayed these things, I usually nodded, said something neutral, changed the subject. He once looked at me sideways and said, "You're not even a little satisfied?" I thought about it. "No," I said. "Not really." He looked like he didn't fully believe me. That's okay. It was still true. It was Claire who told me the part one hadn't known. She'd stayed loosely connected to Lauren's professional circle through an old colleague. And one afternoon over a working lunch, she mentioned something offhand. Something that reframed everything. Lauren had known about Air. Not fully, but enough. Raj, my coworker who I'd shown the early concept to, had mentioned it to someone in his network. Word had apparently circulated in a small, loose way. Nothing specific. Just that a guy named Brandon was working on something in infrastructure communications. Lauren had heard it and dismissed it. Claire told me that someone had relayed Lauren's exact comment back to her. The comment was, "Brandon's been working on something for years. He's a planner, not a doer." I sat with that for a moment, ate a bite of my lunch. "When was this?" I asked. "About 2 months before you two ended. 2 months before the breakup." She had heard something was coming, and she'd still chosen to look elsewhere. Not because she thought I'd fail, because she didn't think enough of my potential to wait and see. That distinction matters. It doesn't make the breakup something to be angry about. It makes it something that was inevitable. She didn't leave because she stopped loving me. She left because she'd never fully believed in me. And I had been pouring steady, quiet effort into a life with someone who was privately counting me out. It also explained the dinner table comment with new clarity. The kind women appreciate later. She'd meant it as a small cruelty disguised as a compliment. But she'd also meant it as her reasoning, her justification to herself, her way of framing the exit before she made it. I appreciate later. She'd already decided she wasn't willing to wait. What she didn't know, what nobody knew yet, was that later wasn't going to take very long. We closed a seed round in January. Small, strategic, enough to hire 4 people and begin a real build cycle. I left my position at the fintech company quietly. No announcement. No farewell drinks. I thanked the people who deserve thanks. Left on good terms. And walked out of that building for the last time on a Friday afternoon in February. The first 6 months of building Air were difficult in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. Technical problems. Personnel issues. A co-founder disagreement that required a complete restructuring of our equity arrangement. There were weeks I wasn't certain we'd survive to the next funding round. But the architecture held. The core product held. And by the time we demoed for Series A investors in September, the platform had 3 significant enterprise clients in active pilot. David Park brought 2 other investors to the September meeting. One of them was a woman named Sandra Holt. She ran an infrastructure-focused fund out of New York. She asked the hardest questions I'd received. I answered every one. After the meeting, she stayed behind while the others left. I've seen a lot of decks this year, she said. Okay. Most of them are built on optimism. Ours is built on architecture. She almost smiled. I know, she said. That's why I'm still here. We closed Series A in November. $8.4 million. A journalist at a Chicago business publication wrote a piece about it. It ran in their digital edition on a Tuesday. By Friday, it had been picked up by 3 national outlets. By the following week, a business news network had requested an interview. I sat down in front of a camera for 35 minutes in a production studio in the West Loop. The anchor was good. Sharp questions. Clean format. We talked about the origin of the idea, the build process, what the platform solved, where the industry was heading. I answered honestly, without performance, without the curated version of the story, just the real one. The interview was scheduled to run across their network programming, airport lounges, hotel lobbies, the rolling business news feed that plays in terminal seating areas across every major hub in the country. I didn't know then where it would play. I just knew the work had earned it. She was traveling for work, a brand strategy conference, Chicago to somewhere, a flight she probably booked 3 weeks in advance. She was in Terminal B at O'Hare. Her flight was delayed by 40 minutes. That detail matters more than it seems. Because 40 minutes is exactly long enough. Long enough to sit down near a gate monitor. Long enough to look up at the screens when the news cycle shifts. Long enough to recognize a face. My face. This is what Darius told me. He'd heard it from a mutual acquaintance. A woman named Priya who had been at the same gate, traveling to the same conference, and who had been standing close enough to see. Priya had recognized Lauren. Had watched Lauren's face when the interview segment began. My name. My company. A graphic showing the acquisition news. Because by then it wasn't just a funding story. It was an acquisition story. A Seattle-based enterprise software company had approached us in month 10. Serious conversations.